Here we are at the second reading and writing module of Bluebook test number 10. And as you can see, the timer's already going. It's a little bit longer than usual because I've gone and selected time and a half just so we have more time to work through this easier of the two modules, or of the three modules that you can see for module 2, because we theoretically wouldn't have performed necessarily as well as we would have liked in the very first section. So we've got a bunch of tools that we'll be using, and we need to make sure that we are working through the section as efficiently as possible. And one of the reasons that you may have gotten to this easier second section is simply because vocabulary isn't necessarily a strong suit for you. And if that's the case, that's not a huge problem in the individual sections, unless you allow yourself to waste a ton of time on those upfront vocabulary questions. They're always going to be the first handful in any reading and writing module. So we're going to try to go through these pretty quickly. Then we're going to skip to the end, work through the English or the writing section that should take a little bit less time on average as well. And then we'll finish with our reading comprehension questions with a little bit more time to consider them, because more time on those reading comprehension questions involving the individual paragraphs generally is a little bit more helpful than if I don't know vocabulary or I don't know a grammar rule. So we're going to start by just reading the information on the left, and we're going to use these highlight and note tools very, very liberally, because we want to find a word that's going to help inform what should go into the blank. So the general store was essential to life in the rural United States during the 1800s because it provided the supplies that the people living in nearby communities needed. Also, the store was a blank of information. People socializing at the general store would share news and help spread it throughout their communities. So I really could just highlight this word of supplies, because that's what it did. It supplied information. So going to our answer choices, source is sometimes where you get a supply of something. It's certainly not a rival. We eliminate that. It's certainly not a condition. And it's certainly not a waste. That'd be a tone reversal. So go highlight a term that could be used to inform what goes into the blank, and hopefully you can see how a question like number 1 can be done relatively quickly, hopefully. Then our next problem, we've got which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase. So another vocabulary structure, we're going to try to highlight something again to inform what should go in the blank, as opposed to just grabbing the choices and plugging and playing them and reading them and seeing what sounds best. According to Potawatomi ecologist Robin Wall Kimmerer, the indigenous method of harvesting HO. And when I've got something that I don't know how to pronounce, I'm just going to call it HO. That's going to be enough. Or sweetgrass, by snapping the plant off at the root, actually blank wild populations. It may seem counterintuitive, she says, but this method of removal allows new sweetgrass plants to repopulate the space with an overall increase in number and vigor. So I'm going to highlight just this word increase, because that's what we know is happening to the wild populations from the surrounding context. So we know we've got to find something that matches increases in context. Selects certainly does not. Originates is a little bit of a trap. It doesn't start the population, it increases it. And then conditions, absolutely not. But in context, replenishes certainly matches. We can read it back in just for this one. And if you don't know what one of these answer choices means, obviously add it to a vocabulary review list. But according to Potawatomi ecologist Robin Wall Kimmerer, the indigenous method of harvesting HO, or sweetgrass, by snapping the plant off at the root actually replenishes wild populations. It may seem counterintuitive, she says, but this method of removal allows new sweetgrass plants to repopulate the space with an overall increase in number and vigor. And I should be like, yep, that's exactly what would fit. Moving on to the next question. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? You can probably tell I probably don't need to read that anymore at this point when I see vocabulary words and just one blank to fill. But we're going to read on the left again with our highlight tool ready to go to mark something that would inform what goes in the blank. The process of mechanically recycling plastics is often considered blank because of the environmental impact and the loss of material quality that often occurs. But chemist T.C., again, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, has helped develop a cleaner process of chemical recycling that converts super absorbent polymers from diapers into a desirable reusable adhesive. So we need to develop a cleaner process. So I'm going to highlight a process, but I'm going to highlight cleaner process, and I should, and I can do it in a yellow here as opposed to the pink that I've been using so far, know that it's got to be the opposite, basically. And if I want to note that, I can use this little note thing and say process, it's the opposite. It's not clean. So, looking at our answer choices, we need to find something that would match not clean in context. Resilient, if I don't know what it means, I have to leave it open. But if I do know what it means, that's a positive, and we're looking for something that is a negative, so that's out. Choice B, inadequate, it's negative at least, so let's hold that for a moment. Dynamic is going to be a positive. Again, if you don't know what it means, you'll have to leave it open. And then satisfactory is going to be a positive, so our correct answer has to be inadequate, even though we don't love it. It's the only one that's possible, and you would read it back, read inadequate back into the answer or into the sentence to confirm that it all makes sense. But for the purposes of this video, we'll move on to the next question. Again, we've got another vocabulary problem. We're going to read from the front. It says, the parasitic daughter plant increases its reproductive success by flowering at the same time as the host plant it latched onto. In 2020, JW and his colleagues determined that the tiny daughter achieves this blank with its host by absorbing and utilizing a protein the host produces when it is about to flower. So what it achieves is this increase in its reproductive success. So we've just got to find something that would match that it's got an increase in reproductive success. So this synchronization, again, maybe I don't love it. I'm not looking for an exact synonym. I'm like, that's a positive thing at least, and it is kind of parasitic. So we could have even highlighted parasitic if we know what parasitic means. It's like kind of taking something from that host. So we'll leave choice A open. Hibernation, if we know what it means, it's going to sleep, and it's not going to sleep. It's increasing its reproductive success, so we should be able to eliminate that. Prediction is just not going to match in context at all. It's not a prediction, it's something that's actually happened. So it just doesn't make any sense chronologically. And then moderation, it's not a moderation, it's like, again, a partnership to a degree. So choice A is the right answer. Again, on the exam, do read it back into the sentences to confirm, but we'll move on to the next question. And at this point, you can see we've reached the reading comprehension questions. So as we discussed, we're going to skip to the end, and you can click on this little button down at the bottom and see all of the questions. Go to number 27, and we're going to work backwards so that we've got the most amount of time for the questions that tend to take the longest on an average basis. So instead, we start with the kind of weird little like taking information in context questions. So the most important part of these questions that always conclude the reading and writing section is going to be to identify and highlight what the correct answer should do. And in this case, the student wants to emphasize the duration and purpose of Cohen's and Rodriguez's work. So I'm going to just highlight duration and purpose of Cohen's and Rodriguez's work. And we see we've got the Gullah are a group of African Americans who have lived in parts of the southeastern United States since the 18th century. Wonderful. Gullah culture is influenced by West African and Central African traditions. Okay, again, wonderful. It's not talking about the duration and purpose. Louise Miller Cohen is a Gullah historian, storyteller, and preservationist. Okay, we're at least talking about Cohen at this point, so let's highlight that. She founded the Gullah Museum of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina in 2003. Okay, that's going to help with the duration here. And then Vermel Rodriguez is a Gullah historian, artist, and preservationist. So that's the other person at issue. You don't have to be perfect with your highlights. I know who that is at this point. And she founded the Gullah Museum of Georgetown, South Carolina in 2003. So I need to find an answer choice that hits on these four bullets most clearly. So starting with choice A, at the Gullah Museums in Hilton Head Island in Georgetown, South Carolina, visitors can learn more about the Gullah people who have lived in the region for centuries. Where are Cohen and Rodriguez? They're not there, so A can't be our correct answer. Choice B, we've got Cohen and Rodriguez. Choice C, we've got Cohen and Rodriguez. Choice D, we don't have Cohen and Rodriguez again, so now we can eliminate a little bit more efficiently. Now we've got to make sure we emphasize the duration and purpose for these people, Cohen and Rodriguez. So Choice B says Louise Miller Cohen and Vermel Rodriguez have worked to preserve the culture of the Gullah people who have lived in the U.S. since the 18th century. Well, this is talking about the duration of the Gullah people living here. It's not talking about how long Louise Miller Cohen and Vermel Rodriguez had worked to preserve Gullah culture through their museums. That shows the duration for these two people. And that's why C is our correct answer and not B. Find reasons to eliminate when you're down to two, and you'll be more accurate at this type of question. And from here, we just keep on clicking back. So the student on number 26 wants to compare the lengths of the two rail tunnels. So we're going to just highlight compare lengths of two rail tunnels. And we've got, again, to highlight in the bullets which is the relevant information. So the Seikan Tunnel is a rail tunnel in Japan. It connects the island of Honshu to the island of Hokkaido, and it is roughly 33 miles long. That is the most important thing, and we know it's about the Seikan Tunnel. The Channel Tunnel is a rail tunnel in Europe. It connects Folkestone, England to Coquelles, France. It is about 31 miles long. So we want to highlight the miles long and the name of it. And we've just got to find an answer choice that hits on these four highlighted bullets at this point. Choice A reads some of the world's rail tunnels, including one tunnel that extends from Folkestone, England to Coquelles, France, are longer than 30 miles. Well, that's some, not specifically these two. So I need the two that were mentioned, and A does not do that. Choice B, the Seikan Tunnel is roughly 33 miles long, while the slightly shorter Channel Tunnel is about 31 miles long. Ding, ding, ding. That seems to do exactly what we want. Choice C is only talking about the Seikan Tunnel, not the Channel Tunnel. So C can be eliminated for missing one of the two tunnels. Then choice D, both the Seikan Tunnel, which is located in Japan, and the Channel Tunnel, which is located in Europe, are examples of rail tunnels where there's no information about length. So our correct answer is B, and we move back again to see one more of this type of question. Number 25 states the student wants to emphasize the effect media had on building Wang Fei Hung's legacy. So we've got to go read the information on the left and highlight the bullets that talk about the effect media had on building Wang Fei Hung's legacy. So while researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Little is known about the life of Wang Fei Hung. Okay, wonderful, but we need the effect that media had on building this legacy. He was born near Foshan, China, and gained a local recognition as a physician and a Hung Ga, also known as Hung Gar, Kung Fu master. Wonderful, nothing about the media yet. He achieved many incredible martial arts feats, some confirmed and some rumored. Again, nothing about media. He has become an internationally known folk hero thanks to his depiction in over 100 films, television shows, and other media. Well, ding, 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 that's exactly what we'd hope for. And then in the 1991 film Once Upon a Time in China, actor Jet Li portrays Wang Fei Hung using superhuman kung fu abilities to save his community. Again, it's one example, but it's still kind of the media, so we'll highlight that bullet as well. Now we're going to our answer choices, looking for something that matches those two pink highlights. Thanks to his depiction in over 100 pieces of media, Wang Fei Hung was locally known as a successful physician and Hung Ga Kung Fu master. We might say, yeah, we're talking about pieces of media. Let's grab that one. So let's be realistic. We'll hold A for now and probably select it, but always check all four of the answer choices. So though he was locally known during his lifetime, Wang Fei Hung's later depiction in television, film, and other media has turned him into an internationally known folk hero. Well, this one's talking about media too. So now I might highlight media here, and go, I got to really think about these two. Then, choice C, various media have depicted Wang Fei Hung, the successful physician and kung fu master who became an internationally known folk hero. Oh, we've got media again here. So I'm going to have to consider this a lot here because it's effective meeting of the media building his legacy. And we're going to come back to that word specifically in a moment. Choice D, Wang Fei Hung's abilities as a kung fu master are depicted in many media, including the 1991 film Once Upon a Time in China. Now let's think about that idea of the legacy. This doesn't tell us how it built the legacy specifically, and that's going to help us evaluate the other answer choices. So choice D is out because it's not about his abilities as a kung fu master. It's what the media did to make him an internationally known folk hero. So we need that phrase, internationally known folk hero. So choice C, Various media have depicted Wang Feihong, the successful physician and kung fu master who became an internationally known folk hero. Just says that they depicted him in that way. It doesn't say that they built him up to be that way. So see, again, a little bit subtle, but it's not correct based on the information that's over there. It's because of the different films that he became the folk hero. So choice B, though he was known locally during his lifetime, and that's true, but he became internationally known because of the later depiction in television, film, and other media. B seems better than A probably now. And it's not because of the media that he was locally known for choice A. Again, highlight, especially in your review, kind of think about why answer choices are wrong. But our correct answer here is going to be B. And that is the end of those little questions. And we move into the next the second most, ending portion of the reading and writing section. You're almost always going to have transition term questions come if you're working backwards from the end here, as we see in this one. So when we're considering transitions, we need to consider whether we need agreement or contrast first. So we're going to read the information on the left, and then we're going to think whether or not we need agreement or contrast, and we'll use the highlight tools to kind of indicate that. Again, if we've got phrasing or words or proper names that we don't know how to pronounce, just call it CNA. So CNA's 2013 novel Americana chronicles the divergent experiences of I and O, a young Nigerian couple after high school. I moves to the United States to attend a prestigious university. Blank O travels to London hoping to start a career there. However, frustrated with the lack of opportunities, he soon returns to Nigeria. So we know that I moves to the United States, and we'll highlight that in one color here. So let's get my highlights and notes here. Oh, where'd it go? There we go. Let's make sure that it actually highlights. There it is. So we'll highlight that in pink. And we know that O also travels to London. So there's another highlight tool. And we've got them in the same color because they're in agreement. So we need to find an answer choice that matches in agreement. So meanwhile certainly does, and meanwhile would be concurrently. Seems to work pretty well. Nevertheless would be a contrast, so it's out. Secondly, one didn't happen and then the other. So C again introduces a concept that is just not chronologically supported. And then, in fact, again, it's kind of making it sound like the same thing, the same instance is occurring. You want to make sure you read your transitions back into the sentence to confirm an overall narrative cohesion. So we'll read CNA's 2013 novel Americana chronicles the divergent experiences of I and O, a young Nigerian couple after high school. I moves to the United States to attend a prestigious university. Meanwhile, O travels to London, hoping to start a career there. However, frustrated by the lack of opportunities, he soon returns to Nigeria. That seems to make a coherent overall narrative to me, and we'll just hit back at this point. Another transition question, we're going to engage it in the exact same way. Organisms have evolved a number of surprising adaptations to ensure their survival in adverse conditions. Tadpole shrimp, again, not going to try to read that, embryos blank can pause development for over 10 years during extended periods of drought. So we've got adaptations to ensure their survival, and we've got an example basically. So we know it's going to be hard to live through a drought. Again, we need an agreement transition and basically should probably be predicting that this is an example. So contrast is going to be a reversal. For example, certainly seems to match. Meanwhile, it's not concurrently for 10 years. So that, again, just is a chronological relationship that isn't supported. And then consequently, it's not because they've adapted that the tadpole shrimp did what it did. It's just an example. So we eliminate choice D. We'll read choice B back into the sentences to confirm that we've got an overall coherent narrative when we're taking our own practice or official SATs. But we'll move on to the next question, just clicking back in the purposes of this video. So another transition situation we're going to read on the left-hand side. Etched into Peru's Nazca Desert are line drawings so large that they can only be fully seen from high above. Archaeologists have known of the lines since the 1920s when a researcher spotted some from a nearby foothill, and they have been studying the markings ever since. Blank archaeologist efforts are aided by drones that capture high-resolution aerial photographs of the lines. So we know that now we've got drones. And we know that archaeologists have known of the lines for a long time. and they have been studying the markings ever since. So we got a passage of time and we've got an agreement structure here. So I need to find an answer choice that indicates agreement first. However is going to be contrast, that's out. Still, it's not still happening since the 1920s is like a contrast. It's just something that's happening now. In comparison, we're not comparing the old efforts, but currently would indicate the contrast of since the 1920s and then ever since, maintaining the chronology. It matches the overall structure pretty nicely to maintain the narrative through line. Of course, on the exam, do read currently back into the sentences to confirm before clicking back and moving on to one more transition structure. So we read on the left, most conifers, trees belonging to the phylum C, are evergreen. I've never been good at the pronunciation of these Latin or Greek terms. That is, they keep their green leaves or needles year round. However, not all conifer species are evergreen. Large trees, blank, lose their needles every fall. So we have to be careful here because there is a contrast, but the contrast has already occurred. So after the however, we know that not all conifer species, if I can get this guy to actually highlight, there it goes, and are evergreen, and these large trees are a specific example that lose their needles every fall. So these two statements actually are in agreement, even though a contrast was introduced earlier in the little paragraph. We don't need a nevertheless. We don't need a meanwhile. And we're not adding to anything. Large trees simply are the example, the instance of how not all conifer species are evergreen because they lose their needles every fall. And so, again, read, for instance, back into the paragraph to confirm when you're doing your own reading and writing section. But moving on to the first, well, the last, if we'd gone chronologically from the front, but the first true grammatical question we're going to see. So we can tell that there is a difference in punctuation. So we really can pretty much try to ignore the sentences that are not pertaining to this specific sentences grammar when we're talking about punctuation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight and I'm going to put a little note here so we can do what we like to call the vertical line test. So we're going to have at the end of maybe a sentence, at least leading up to the punctuation, this word threefold. And then I'm just going to write a vertical line because I don't know what punctuation, if any, should come after threefold. And then we're going to have the word two. And so we need to consider whether everything up to threefold is going to be a complete sentence potentially, and then after threefold is a complete sentence or not, or could stand alone as a complete sentence. So if we were to say, and I'm going to actually use a dash here just so I don't confuse myself and think that I'm actually considering the colon. But if we read, the conference's goals were threefold. Well, the conference's goals are would be the subject, and were is a verb, so this could stand alone as a complete sentence. Afterwards, however, if we read, to ensure women's participation in the proceedings of the Paris Peace Conference, to secure the right of women to serve in the League of Nations, and to advocate for human rights, that's an incomplete clause. And dependent clause couldn't stand alone as its own sentence. So that means that we cannot have stop punctuation, meaning either a period or a semicolon, because those have to come between two independent clauses. Furthermore, we cannot have no punctuation because that would come between two incomplete ideas. What we need is the colon because we have a list following the independent clause without a transition or conjunction. So that's going to be our correct answer. And we didn't have to really read that first sentence. And we can use some notes to force engagement as we move back to number 19. Here we see that the verbs are changing. Once again, I'm going to try to avoid engaging the first sentence. It's not going to have any relevance to this in all likelihood. So if I've got verb tenses changing, I need to find the subject. We're going to highlight the subject. So in the Book of Salt, for example, the exiled character of Bin connects to his native Saigon through the food he prepares, while in Bitter in the Mouth, The character of Linda. Okay, so the character of Linda is our subject. Blank, a form of synesthesia whereby the words she hears evoke tastes. So I need to highlight evoke because we need to match the tenses with everything else in the sentence. So Linda hears words and they evoke tastes. So that's present tense. So we don't want to say experienced or had experienced or will be experiencing. Even though we see the exiled character, that could be a little bit of a trap. Focus on what Linda does to get to the correct answer of C. And of course, do read uh, the word you choose back into the sentence here, and you may read the opening sentence if you would like further context, but hopefully you can see how just tracking the subject and verbs with our highlight tool can help evaluate a problem like 19 there. Number 18, another another punctuation testing question. So we're going to highlight again just around that blank, and we're going to use our vertical line test once more. So we'll just put the little this guy here. And so the word that's going to come before is going to be 90% vertical line, and then we're going to just have such. I know there's an and in choice B, but we're just going to consider 90% and such unless we need to consider the one after. So I'm just going to write before this time. Hopefully we're understanding what's happening here. We've got after. So we read from the start up to 90% to determine whether that could stand alone as its own independent sentence. So after the United Kingdom began rolling out taxes equivalent to a few cents on single-use plastic grocery bags in 2011, plastic bag consumption decreased by up to 90%. That seems to be a complete sentence. So we'll hold on to that. It's got a subject, it's got a verb. Then, if we pick up after that, though, we've got such taxes are subject to what economists call the rebound effect. As the change became normalized, plastic bag use started to creep back up. So after we've got such taxes are subject. So we've got another complete idea, which means we've got two complete ideas. We need to have stop punctuation, which would be a period or a semicolon. We don't want to have just a comma because that's going to create a run-on. Putting an and in between them, another run-on. If we've got a period and a such, that separates the two independent clauses that would be complete sentences on their own. Obviously, we cannot just have no punctuation at all, and we'll hit back to go to the prior problem. Probably don't need to reread that one once you've evaluated it because the punctuation is the way that it is. Now, we've got another verb tense situation. So we're going to just read that later sentence, try to highlight whatever the subject is, and then go to the verbs and consider them. So the lock would increase the salinity of the lakes and blank a natural barrier of water most marine creatures would be unable to cross. So the lock would increase the salinity. So it's the lock that is the subject, and the lock is going to be singular. So the lock creates is a little bit of a a trap here, and we'll come back to why that's going to be the case. But it's not going to be creating. That's not going to match would increase, and it's not going to be created. So here we need to basically consider the parallelism of the lock would increase and would create, not creates. So it's the would that's modifying the verb here. Make sure you read create versus creates in the uh, in the sentence so that you can properly determine how it needs to be parallel to get question 17 correct. Moving back one more time. We've got another verb style question. We got to go highlight what's relevant to the verb. So, a member of the Cherokee Nation, Mary Golda Ross, is renowned for her contributions to NASA's planetary flight book, which blank detailed mathematical guidance for missions to Mars and Venus. So, the which is talking about her contributions to NASA's planetary flight handbook. And she is renowned, so provided could work. It's certainly not having provided, because if I did which having provided detailed mathematical guidance for missions to Mars and Venus, I create a fragment because I need to put that having provided in comparison chronologically to some other piece of information that's not there. Which to provide, again, just is not the correct intended meaning here. And providing is not going to be correct because we once again have created a fragment because which providing detailed mathematic guidance for missions to Mars and Venus had to do something else. You will need to read these answer choices back into the sentence, probably more so here to confirm whether you've got a fragment or possibly a run on. But rereading provided him a member of the Cherokee Nation, Mary Golda Ross, is renowned for her contributions to NASA's Planetary Flight Handbook, which provided detailed mathematic guidance for missions to Mars and Venus, and that should make narrative sense. And moving back again, we've got a pronoun possession and contraction question here. So I again need to find the subject for this pronoun that's going to go in the blank. And because it's the very first word in the sentence, I probably needed to read the sentence before. British scientists James Watson and Francis Crick won the Nobel Prize in part for their 1953 paper announcing the double helix structure of DNA, but it is misleading to say that Watson and Crick discovered the double helix. Blank findings. So whose findings were it? It was Watson and Crick. So T-H-Y-R-E with an apostrophe in the middle, that's going to be they are. So A is out. It would be just one of them, and you don't want to call a person an it anyway. It is rude. Same thing with ITS, even though that is going to be the possessive. That's going to be like they owned it, whereas it apostrophe s would have been it is. Again, that wouldn't have made sense anyway. Of course, it should be a there, and we move back into our first question involving the reading comprehension. And you can see we've got a little bit more time for this last handful of around 8 questions. So when we're trying to logically complete the text, we need to force engagement by highlighting the most relevant information. So this reads, although military veterans make up a small proportion of the total population of the United States, they occupy a significantly higher proportion of the jobs in the civilian government. One possible explanation for this disproportionate representation is that military service familiarizes people with certain organizational structures that are also reflected in the civilian government bureaucracy. And this familiarity thus does something. So we know military service familiarizes people with bureaucracy, both in the army, for instance, and the government. And we know that military veterans occupy a significantly higher proportion of jobs in the civilian government. So I just need to find an answer choice that matches this. And so I'm going to read them and I'm going to consider, does this have to be true based on the information we just highlighted in pink? So choice A, makes civilian government jobs especially appealing to military veterans. We're at least talking about the relevant information. So we might highlight civilian government jobs, military veterans, and go, at the very least, I got to hold on to it. Choice B, alters the typical relationship between military service and subsequent career preferences. I have no idea what the typical relationship is based on the information in the paragraph. So B is going to need additional information, should be eliminated for that typical relationship being undefined almost immediately. Then choice C, encourages non-veterans applying for civilian government jobs to consider military service instead. Well, we're not concerned with non-veterans, and we're not encouraging those people to go into the Army. So a couple of reasons we should be able to eliminate C almost immediately. And then choice D, increases the number of civilian government jobs that require some amount of military experience to perform. Okay, so we've got to consider the distinction between these two things. So we are talking about military service familiarizing people with certain organizational structures that are also reflected in the civilian government bureaucracy. And it's that familiarity that's supposed to make one of these two things happen. So makes civilian government jobs especially appealing to military veterans. Again, maybe, right? Increases the number of civilian government jobs that require some amount of military experience to perform. Are we trying to make the civilian government jobs like military jobs? I mean, we know that it's about the people in the military having familiarity, not the civilian government having familiarity. So D is really introducing a wrong subject kind of relationship. And if you read choice A back into the sentences, you should have an overall narrative, and you would do that if you were actually engaging with the problem as a practice section. But in the interest of time, we'll move to the next problem, just clicking back, number 13. Here, we're being asked to support the student's claim. So we're going to have to identify the claim, and we may actually write out a little prediction of what could support it. So, born in 1891 to a Quechua-speaking family in the Andes Mountains of Peru, Martin Chamby is today considered one of the most renowned figures of Latin American photography. In a paper for an art history class, a student claims that Chamby's photographs have considerable ethnographic value. In his work, Chamby was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society, representing his subjects with both dignity and authenticity. So the claim is this. It has ethnographic value. So we need to look for these diverse elements of Peruvian society that were captured with dignity and authenticity. So we're going to just look for reasons to eliminate, and we can highlight them as we go along. So A reads, Chamby took many commissioned portraits of wealthy Peruvians, but he also produced hundreds of images carefully documenting the peoples, sites, and customs of indigenous communities in the Andes. Okay, maybe, right? We're talking about all of these different elements of Peruvian society, and it's diverse. So that seems decent because we've got both wealthy Peruvians and we've got the indigenous Peruvians in the Andes. Now, moving on to choice B. Chamby's photographs demonstrate a high level of technical skill, as seen in his strategic use of illumination to create dramatic light and shadow contrast. We're not concerned with the technical skill, so we'll just highlight dramatic light and shadow contrast and be like, that's not about the ethnographic value. Then choice C. During his lifetime, Chamby was known and celebrated both within and outside his native Peru, as his work was published in places like Argentina, Spain, and Mexico. Where the work was published has nothing to do with what was in the work, so we'll just highlight that phrasing and eliminate choice C. And then choice D, some of the peoples and places that Chamby photographed had long been popular subjects for Peruvian photographers or photographers. Well, again, which are those? Are they people? Are they, diverse elements of Peruvian society? I have no idea. So our correct answer is A, and we'll move back for number 12. Here we've got a table and a question asking which choice best describes data from the table that support the researcher's claim. So we're being asked to support the researcher's claim here. And we're going to have to, again, identify that claim first. So we've got approximate rates of speech and information conveyed for 5 languages. I'm probably not going to gauge the table too much until I figure out what the researcher's claim is. A group of researchers working in Europe, Asia, and Oceania conducted a study to determine how quickly different Eurasian languages are typically spoken in syllables per second, and found how much information they can effectively convey in bits per second. They found that although languages vary widely in the speed at which they are spoken, the amount of information languages can effectively convey tends to vary much less. Thus, they claim that 2 languages with very different spoken rates can nonetheless convey the same amount of information in a given amount of time. So I'm looking for 2 languages with a different rate of speech, but the same rate of information. That's what we're looking for. So choice A, among the 5 languages in the table, Thai and Hungarian have the lowest rates of speech and the lowest rates of information. Well, that's not matching our need of finding 2 different rates of speech, but same rates of information. That says it's same and same, so that's out. Choice B, Vietnamese conveys information at approximately the same rate as Spanish, despite being spoken at a slower rate. Okay, approximately same rate. Let's see that. Vietnamese, Spanish, yes. Slower rate, yes. That matches exactly. We want to be proactive. We should select B, and we can move probably more briskly through choices C and D if this were an actual practice exam. But for the purposes of this video, among the 5 languages in the table, the language that is spoken the fastest is also the language that conveys information the fastest. That does not match the pink highlighted claim. And Serbian and Spanish are spoken at approximately the same rate, but Serbian conveys information faster. Well, we don't want it to be conveyed faster. We want it to be the same amount. So we can select B and we move back to number 11. We're trying to use data from the table to complete the statement. So The highest number of housing starts in the United States, I'm just going to highlight that right now, and the highest number of housing starts is in April. So simple enough. So in the first 4 months, there's the most highest, and then we move backwards. We don't have to overcomplicate that one. So then we've got number 10 here. We're trying to use the data to complete the sentence. So I can just go to the end and find that the team found that the species with the highest global biomass is something. So I'm just going to highlight for myself, or that phrase, and I'm going to potentially go straight to highest global biomass. We see that should be white-tailed deer. I need to read everything just to make sure I'm not missing something, but it says global biomass is the total mass of living materials, such as animals and plants on Earth. A team of scientists estimated the global biomass by species of various wild land mammals, and the highest global mass is therefore the white-tailed deer. I don't need to do anything more. We'll hit back and move to number 9. Here we're being asked which finding, if true, would most strongly support the team's conclusion, so we need to focus on that conclusion as well. I might skip to the end to find it. So the team concluded that cattle were likely raised closer to human settlements, whereas sheep and goats were allowed to roam farther away. Okay, so I get that information and I can use that to inform what's happening in the paragraph. Archaeologist PV, anthropologist XL, and their colleagues investigated the domestication of farm animals in China during the Bronze Age by analyzing the chemical composition of the bones of sheep, goats, and cattle from this era. The team determined that wild plants made up the bulk of the sheep and goats' diets, while cattle's diet consisted largely of millet, a crop cultivated by humans. So we've got to say that it's because of this that cattle were by humans, but sheep and goats could go farther away. So, choice A, analysis of the animal bones shows that the cattle's diet also consisted of wheat, which humans cultivated widely in China during the Bronze Age. Well, that shows that the cattle were next to the humans, potentially. Then, choice B, further investigation of sheep and goat bones revealed that their diets consisted of small portions of millet as well. Well, that doesn't really do anything meaningfully, and if anything, it does actually seem to make it seem like the goats and sheep were next to the humans as well. So B, if anything, is a reversal that would weaken the conclusion. Then choice C, cattle's diets generally require larger amounts of food and greater variety of nutrients. I need a whole lot of additional information to relate that specifically to the limited information in the paragraph. Then choice D, the diets of sheep, goat, and cattle were found to vary based on what the farmers in the Bronze Age settlement could grow. Again, that makes it seem like this evidence is less relevant. Of course, we may have selected A on the actual exam a little while ago, but hopefully you can see why we can eliminate the other answers too. Moving back one more time, we're being asked, what did Gloria Richardson lead? So we're going to go into the paragraph and try to find that proactively. It says, in the 1960s, Gloria Richardson led a movement to promote racial equality. I'm going to highlight that right now. I probably would read everything else, but if you had fewer than 5 minutes left, I might go a little bit more quickly into the answer choices. So her involvement in this effort was inspired by her daughter, Donna Richardson. In 1961, Donna joined protests organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Cambridge, Maryland. Following her daughter, Gloria joined these protests too. Gloria soon became the co-chair of the Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee. She was also the leader of what became known as the Cambridge Movement. So we'll highlight those two sentences as well about Gloria. So the Cambridge Movement. Yep. She didn't lead her daughter. There's nothing about environmental protections, and it's not a new business. We can hit back and move on from number 8. Here we're being asked, what did the narrator and Mario do while riding in the car? Again, we can highlight the task first, and we're going to focus on that information highlighted as we read. Following text is adapted from Sylvia Acevedo's 2018 memoir, Path to the Stars, My Journey from Girl Scout to Rocket Scientist. The narrator is traveling by car with her family to Mexico City. Mario and Laura are her brother and sister. So Mario, I know, is her brother. And that's who we care about, is the narrator and Mario. Mario and I played games to see how many different license plates we could spot. We'll highlight that. And then Laura liked to look for children in the back seats of the cars we passed. We were used to the 45-minute drive to El Paso and familiar with the 6-hour ride to Chihuahua, but I wondered what the long journey to Mexico City would be like. So we got to find something that matches that played games to see how many different license plates they could spot. They did not read books. They did not sing songs. They did not go to sleep. They did play games, and we hit back to number 6. Here we're being asked for the overall structure of the text. So this reads, the following text is adapted from Gwendolyn Bennett's 1926 poem Street Lamps in Early Spring. Night wears a garment, all velvet soft, all violet blue, and over her face she draws a veil, as shimmering fine as a floating dew, and here and there in the black of her hair the subtle hands of night move slowly with their gem-starred light. So we're basically describing the street lamps very colorfully, but that's what we're looking at. Choice A, it presents alternating descriptions of a night in a rural area and in a city area. There's nothing about a rural area. We can eliminate that immediately. It sketches an image of nightfall and then an image of sunrise. There is absolutely no sunrise. It makes an extended comparison of night to human being. Maybe. It portrays how night changes from one season of the year to the next. Absolutely not. And our correct answer is C. We hit back again. And we've got the overall purpose of this text. So we'll highlight that. It says the following text is adapted from Pam Munoz Ryan's 2020 novel Manana Land. In the village where Max lives, there is an old fortress called Lorena. Children in the village say that the fortress is haunted. For as long as he could remember, Max had begged Papa, his father, to take him to see Lorena and the ruins up close. He'd be a hero among his friends if he was the first boy to cross the haunted gates. Just because Papa didn't believe in ghosts doesn't mean that he weren't there. Maybe this summer Papa would finally take him. He was almost 12. So it's basically about how he really wants to go to see Lorena. So it's not about how proud Max's father is of Max. It does not explain why Max doesn't want to grow up yet. It's not criticizing Max. But it very much does show how much Max wants to visit Lorena. Don't overthink these kinds of questions. Have a mental prediction. Highlight something to force engagement. We hit back one more time, and you can see we are now at the vocabulary questions where we started the section. So we can just come back up to this little button here, go to the review page. And from the review page, if you are done with this section, you can click next. If you are not done with the section, you can go back to any question you'd like to review. And of course, when you do hit next, it's going to tell you the module is over, and you will then begin, after a short break, your math section for this Bluebook exam practice number 10, if you haven't already done so.